Evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's session of the Irish 30. Thank you for joining us. I would like to acknowledge the Bidjigal people of the Aurora Nation as the traditional custodians of the land on which we live and work, and we pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. And we also pay our respects to those on the lands on which you all live. The Irish 30 is a collection of webinars brought to you by the Irish Support Agency. Each session explores a different aspect of health and well-being, and the webinars can all be found on our ISA YouTube channel. Tonight, we are joined by Orlaith Sheill, who has worked as a counsellor for over 16 years and who specialises in grief support. We are also joined by Roisin Traynor, who many of you will know, and Ashleighs, who have both kindly offered to share their own experience to tonight's discussion. I'd like to just start with a few housekeeping notes. If I could ask you all to keep yourselves on mute unless you wish to speak. This session is being recorded, so feel free to pop your camera off if you wish to do so. I would just like to say that some viewers may find this discussion a little difficult. Others are going to be sharing their personal experiences, and it can be triggering for some people. We have added some support contact numbers in the chat box. Please feel free to reach out should you need any support whatsoever in the chat box or privately over the next few days to us at the ISA. And let's just make sure that we're all respectful throughout the conversation. Thank you. So Orla, if we would like to start with you, I want to welcome you and thank you again for joining us. I suppose tonight we just want to acknowledge how difficult the last 18 months have been. We've all had some personal challenges, some really difficult decisions to make. Within the Irish community, I think it's fair to say we can feel that level of unsettledness. Everyone maybe is a wee bit low, especially given that in New South Wales, most of us are back into an extended lockdown again. So tonight, I suppose we just want to normalise the reality and just acknowledge the range of emotions that can be brought up for everyone. Those feelings of grief, loss, depression, anxiety, fear, and knowing that these feelings are really valid. Would you mind maybe talking a wee bit to that?
Absolutely, and thank you so much for having me on tonight. It means a lot to be here. I guess just to talk to what you've just said, one of the things that I've been thinking about with regard to this evening is to acknowledge how we're all in survival mode right now. And I think it's really important to name that this evening, because I think that also compounds everything else that we're going through as well as a community and individually. So when you're in survival mode, you're going to be on alert. You're feeling a sense of threat. So we're all feeling that right now, and the lockdown just compounds that even further. So when we feel threat, we don't have those lovely positive hormones that keep us calm and strong and at ease. We feel cortisol and adrenaline, and we feel like we want to fight or flight. And when we're in that state and hypervigilant around COVID itself, our government is telling us, make sure that when you go out, everybody you see, you have to assume they have COVID. That's a really good strategy for making us think about what we're doing and to stay safe. However, we're constantly telling ourselves we're at risk, we feel threatened. So as a consequence, we're hypervigilant, we're stressed, and we're not going to be thinking clearly. We're not going to be reflective. We may react instead of reflecting. And it really, it's really hard for our brain to have clarity. It's really hard to feel calm. And so we're coming from that place constantly. And then we're coming from a place of lockdown grief. We're not able to do the normal things we would do in Australia. We're not able to live the normal life we've been living here. And then compounding with that is the emigrant grief. So it's so layered. And I think it's really important to break it down. And I don't want to minimize it or simplify it too much, but I think just to break it down like that might help people just to think we are experiencing so much and we've never been here before. We've never had this situation before. The other part of the experience is the missing everyone, missing touch, missing eye contact, missing hearing people's voices, missing connecting. And those, what in that missing, we're not able to stay calm because we miss touch, we miss seeing people, we miss our families and friends. So I guess it's just about trying to care for ourselves as much as we can and acknowledge we are missing, and that's really, really challenging. And everybody deals with that differently. But with regard to the emigrant experience, it's an experience that all our generations before have gone through. And I was just thinking today about that Christy Moore song, In the City of Chicago. It's written about the famine in 1847. And one of the lyrics is, in the city of Chicago, as the evening shadows fall, there are people dreaming of the hills of Donegal. You know, so the emigrant story is really raw right now because everybody's missing, everybody's feeling the pain, and that freedom of being able to go is not there. And if you go, there may be a cost to making that decision. So I think the emigrant story is really, really hard. And I think when a disaster like this happens, it also accelerates us to make decisions perhaps we may not have thought about before, or we may not have been ready to make. So we've now been accelerated to, do I want to stay? Do I want to go? What does that mean? I came here for a reason. Is that still the same reason I'm staying? And also when we go through something that is life-altering, like a pandemic, we question our whole lives, our perspective changes, our perspective shifts. So it would make sense that people are feeling really confused, maybe uncertain, torn is in the title of tonight's webinar. And that would make sense with all that I've just mentioned there now. So I hope that makes sense. There's so much in it, it's really hard to simplify very quickly this evening.
It, Orla. Look, it is really complex, and I have to say I was very grateful myself to be able to speak to you when personally I missed out on a best friend's wedding. That was really tough for me, and what stood out for me was you just saying, like, go feel that emotion and be kind to yourself at this time and have a cry if you need to have a cry, because what I was doing was trying to bite my lip and get on with it and say it's just one day, when really I needed to have a good sob and eat the chocolate and drink the tea. And it's not easy. And we do feel a lot of guilt about something that is beyond our control. Why do we feel that guilt, and how can we maybe speak to our family members and friends at home that possibly don't understand the really tough decisions that we have to make potentially for events at home?
So I really think that's an interesting word, guilt, isn't it? Because, particularly for Irish people, we're very good at guilt. But I think it's kind of one word that is, there's so much layered behind it. And I'm wondering, is it guilt or is it processing of grief right now? You know, yes, there's definitely guilt, but it's, I think, more about being here and questioning and making sense of and processing grief. So do I want to be here? What does it mean to be here? What does it mean for my family and friends that I am here? You know, so that processing is happening, making sense of, making meaning. What do I want in my life now? What does this mean? So I think it's more complex than just guilt. And I think that it's huge grief and uncertainty, and a time of real introspection, because it's a time for what do I want after this? Because this is a temporary situation, but it feels long term. So what do I want after this? So maybe that might make more sense to people if they're feeling guilt, maybe to think about, well, actually, maybe I'm just trying to work through these feelings. These feelings are uncomfortable, they're difficult, and I can't make sense of them, but I'm trying to make sense of them.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting when you had mentioned the immigrant experience before, and right now I think, yes, we've all missed out on moments in the past, but for that freedom to be taken away from us, like before we could just jump on the plane, but this is something that generations before us, they had to miss out on those. And you can find great strength in yourself during these times as well. A question that Una had was, what can we learn about ourselves during times of crisis and uncertainty?
I think it's I can't answer for everybody, but I think patience is huge. Learning that you have your own survival toolkit. You may not like to have to use it, but everybody has the ability to survive this and manage this and navigate it. It's just how. And you're going to have days that you don't want to do this and are hard, and nights, and then you might have a reprieve from it and feel good and restore. But everybody is doing their best and they have this toolkit. And I think to remind yourselves of that, and patience, and understanding that we have never, ever been here before. So we don't know, we haven't got a book that says this is how you're going to get out, or get out of this, or manage this. So just being good to yourself as you learn to live with, as you learn to accommodate this. And being kind to yourself in this.
Absolutely. And I think the wonderful thing about the Irish community here is that we are so connected, but if people are listening tonight or watching this at another time, knowing that you can reach out and that you're not going through this alone, we do have access through the amazing Solace counselling service. So we'd be more than happy to support people in any way if they are struggling and need someone to talk to. I think it would be really good now if we introduced Roisin, because Roisin's one of our committee members, and she has had her own personal experience recently of feeling torn and missing out on a really important event at home. Roisin, do you want to talk a wee bit about that?
Yeah, I think it was the same weekend as you, Katrina. We were both feeling it that weekend. So I've been in Australia 6.5 years now, and I've just never really felt that kind of readiness to go home just yet. I was, working through all the visas and still very much on that journey to get citizenship. So it was something I was I'm not thinking about until then. And I think, so my brother got married last month, the end of June. And it was one of those weddings that was put off, and she will get home and, it will go ahead. And then it was just kind of facing up to the reality that it wasn't looking any, like I was going to get home anytime soon. So I think for me, the first year of the pandemic was a little bit easier than maybe it is now. And, it sounds really selfish to say this, but Ireland was on hold, and the weddings weren't happening. We were really free here, and the celebrations were on hold, the parties were on hold. It will all be next year. Once you get back, we'll do all this. And you had that hope kind of happening. And, even when you were talking to the ones at home, they were like, oh, stay where you're at. You're in a really good position. Don't be coming home. You're missing nothing. And it was true. And now we're kind of, the tables have turned. We went into kind of lockdown the day off Seamus's wedding, and everything just opened up around home around that time, and everything. And I think it was that kind of you're just so many emotions about it, because you're so happy and that they needed that at home. They've been through hell for the last 18 months, and you're so glad that they're finally getting their day. And they'd put off and cost them fortunes of money and disappointment and everything. So you're just so glad to see them getting their day, but you can't help but having that sort of feeling at the back, you're sad. And I think that was hard, and it was feeling guilty for feeling sad at the same time. I think that's what I really struggled with. So I come from a family, like, we'd be very stoic and not really talking about our emotions or any of that touchy-feely stuff. So like, I was very much like, you know, just go ahead and have the best day and I'll be fine and I'll be celebrating in Sydney. And I think I really like concentrated on like the really like superficial stuff and the material stuff. So I was like, you know, I booked a trip to Noosa for that weekend and was like going to celebrate in Noosa, and had like this nice restaurant this whole day planned out, and then COVID hit, so I had to come back early, which didn't happen. So I like rushed out and bought the decorations and the food, and I think I just really busied myself with all that stuff, and I wasn't really allowing myself to think, how am I actually feeling? And I was really concentrating on the practical stuff, not giving myself a chance to process it. And that was from the whole lead up. I done that. I think, you know, with my family as well, like it was really hard for them. So I didn't want to show that I was upset. Especially for my mum and dad. I was like, and my sister said to me in advance, like, I was upset one day on the phone to her and she was like, don't let mommy see you like that. So I was so conscious, like, to put on this like happy face with the whole thing. But then I think once they actually came on, then it really hit me like a train, because I hadn't prepared myself for it, and I hadn't acknowledged and given myself permission to feel like how, you know, I actually did feel like grief. And I don't think I even allowed myself to call it grief until I was like chatting to you, Katrina, afterwards, and you were sharing all that Orla shared with you. But that, like, normally if you were like grieving for something, you like allow yourself to feel the grief and you don't feel bad for it. But there was this like kind of horrible turmoil, because you're like, I can't feel like this, like this is so selfish, like they're having their day. And I think that was the thing I was kind of struggling with. So it took me a while to get over it. Then I think it kind of hit me like a ton of bricks, and it stuck around for a while. And I think I just had to kind of admit defeat and allow myself to be upset and allow myself to have mixed emotions about it. They just had the most amazing wedding ever, and I was so happy to see that. And there's like, I couldn't pick a better sister-in-law. I was just so happy with everything. But I still just, I think I'll always feel a little bit robbed by it, maybe, that like COVID took this away. And you know, that's the first person in our house to get married. It's my only brother, and I've, you know, as much as we can celebrate when I go home, I wasn't there for the wedding, and I think I do feel sad about it. And I think one thing I did, which I kind of had to stop doing, was kept saying, everyone, like, there's so many people have it so much worse than me. You know, I've had friends that lost their parents and had to go home. And even talking to Ashleighs and what she's going to share, it's like, I even feel like a bit like, I don't know, dramatic, like being like, this is my experience. But it's like, everybody has their own experiences, and there are definitely people that had it much worse than me, and I'm so grateful for that. But it doesn't, it's my emotions about it are still valid. And I think that's what really I had to learn, is like, you know, everybody's got their kind of hurdles and their challenges, but it doesn't make it mine's any less real.
Absolutely, yeah, it doesn't minimize your emotions, and thank you for sharing that. And how are you feeling now, like that you've kind of had that time to process? Is that something that you can look back on and say that if this comes up again, you would do something differently? You would have allowed yourself that space? Yeah,
I think that's definitely it. I think in hindsight, I probably should have like allowed myself to sit with it, and maybe been a little bit more open and honest with my family as well, because like, you know, it was like, don't let on like you're annoyed, don't let on you're upset, and try and hide that. And like, I, even when I was on the phone that morning, I think like they still thought I was going to walk through the door. And like, as soon as my dad seen me on FaceTime, he was like, you're actually not, you're not here. And then I think because I kind of maybe hadn't shown my emotions with them and actually shown how upset I was, that maybe give them conflicting thoughts about what was going to happen. So I think maybe just being a little bit open and more honest with them, and allowing myself to like feel how I was feeling in the lead up might have helped a little bit, and sitting with it. But afterwards, I would say it hung around for a little while. I felt really rubbish for a few weeks. Also, we were going into lockdown, and my partner was working away, so he had to leave the next day, and I just felt really probably a bit isolated and away from everyone that I cared about. But I think it takes a little bit of time, but it's definitely better now. I think for the first few days I was like, why didn't I just go home? Like, why didn't I just pack up my life, quit my job, leave my partner, leave my house? Why didn't I do all that just to go home? And then I think as time passed, I was like, I was able to kind of rationalize it a little bit more. And I still do get upset now and again. Like, I think there'll be, you know, like when the wedding video comes out and certain little things happen, I think it will, you know, kind of hit home a little bit more. But I think I've really just kind of talked it a lot more with my friends, and being really open and honest with them has really, really helped. So I don't feel like so isolated about it. And, you know, tonight, like, I really was in two minds about even sharing this experience tonight, because I'm used to talking in these webinars, but just not about something so personal. But I think even this is helping, like hearing other people that are going through the same thing. It makes you feel like you're not like a bad person for feeling this way, whenever it should be a celebration for everyone at home.
Absolutely. Roisin, I think this is going to help so many people that maybe have got similar things coming up, or it has in the past, to normalise, you know, those feelings. And thank you for sharing that. Orla, do you have anything maybe to say to Roisin or anyone in a similar situation?
Well, to Roisin, I hear a kind of a hardness on yourself for not knowing how you're going to feel. And I feel for you in that, because you couldn't have known until you went through it, right?
Mm.
So I think to kind of forgive yourself for not being as prepared as you thought you should be, because you hadn't lived it, and you needed to go through it to know how hard it was going to hurt. And maybe there was a protection mechanism happening for you to, you know, so that you could get through watching online and manage that. But I think to be kinder to yourself about not being as prepared because you hadn't been through this before, and really allowing yourself to feel it is so important. And well done for going through the hard stuff. I think what's really a trigger here as well that I hear is the tables have turned, is the word you used. You know, that it was somewhat okay when things were on hold. It was almost like we could all manage missing and not missing out when things were on hold. But now that things are very free in Ireland, and it's summer, and they're in a very different place, there is great happiness for everyone, but the missing is harder. And I think that's really a trigger for everyone as well right now, you know. And summer is a trigger. Just that sense of there's nowhere like Ireland in the summer, right? And those memories of what summer means, of gatherings, of all of that is a sensory trigger as well. So just being really mindful that this time and this freedom that Ireland's experiencing, you're going to have complex emotions around that. And that could be envy, it could be jealousy, it could be happiness. It's relief maybe for some people that their families can finally see each other. But there's the real hard part of missing and not being there and not getting to be part of that.
Yeah, I definitely relate to that. I think last summer I kind of felt it to a certain extent as well, because they did open up a little bit, and it was like, oh, like, and it just looks amazing on Instagram, and Ireland, there's nowhere like it. So I think that's my other tip, is maybe spend less time on social media.
That's a good one. Thank you so much, Roisin. And Ashleighs, I'd like to introduce you now. Ashleighs is going to share her experience. She's had a tough time, and hopefully will be able to assist others that may be going through something similar.
Yeah, hi everyone. So this is my third year in Australia, and last April, when we were kind of in the height of everything, and we were in lockdown here, and there was a lockdown in Ireland. My granddad passed away with COVID, and it was very sudden because he had been in the hospital for something else, and he caught it while he was in hospital in the ward. And so, yeah, it was a very difficult time. But in looking back on it now, I didn't experience a huge amount of that guilt at the time because my hands were tied. I actually couldn't go home. You know, there was about 4 days between us finding out that he had COVID and him passing away. And then the funeral was a few days later. So if you remember the mess with the flights and everything last year, people spending thousands and thousands and getting cancellations and everything, we just knew there was no way. So, and even then, if I had gone home, you know, everyone would have known that I, you know, if I was to attend the funeral, that I wouldn't be quarantining for 2 weeks. So my hands were really tied, and so I didn't really have that decision of should I go home. I mean, I would have. I think coming to Australia, my biggest fear was that one of my grandparents would pass away while I was here, but never did I ever think that I wouldn't be able to go home. That was just never a thought in my head. And knowing my parents, they probably had a few bob on the side for, you know, an emergency flight type situation, you know, kind of like if she changes her mind for any reason, you know, if she changes her mind, if she wants to come back, we can throw her a few bob to help her come home if needed. But and I think that was really hard for my dad. Actually, I remember being on the phone to him and knowing, like I could see it was so hard for him that he wasn't able to you know, just to bring me home. So yeah, it was hard for everyone. I think that I couldn't come home, but at the end of the day, look, I think the the Irish guilt rears its head in numerous other type of ways. So I couldn't feel guilty about not being home, but in the weeks after, when COVID was getting so bad at home, it kind of manifested in a different way. I was kind of thinking, oh, I should go home and I should work in like the testing centres or the quarantine centres, because I have a master's of public health and a degree in science. And so that those, you know, they were taking, you know, people with my sort of experience in, you know, to help on the front lines. And I was hemming and hawing for weeks and weeks about going home. Should I go home? Is it the right thing to do? But I was lucky. I, you know, kind of kept thinking to myself, why am I here? What is it that's keeping me here? And it was just something my auntie said to me when she was on the phone to me. I think a day before the funeral, she said, you know, you're going to be upset. Like, obviously it's very upsetting. Like, allow yourself to feel it and all of that. But, you know, Granddad wouldn't want you to feel like this. He wouldn't want you to give up, you know, your dreams and, you know, all of your plans and to drop everything for him. He only ever wanted the best for you. And, you know, would have done anything to help you. And so don't feel like you have to do anything for any of us, you know. And so that like really tethered me in a way. And I just, whenever I kind of felt up in the air and like very, very confused about how I feel or what I should do, what can I do, it was kind of like just this one line, kind of like a mantra that kept like coming up in my head. And I think, you know, every family has a way of like speaking to each other. And, you know, the way that my auntie said it was just so like, it was just very helpful. So yeah, it was really difficult. But, you know, over a year later, I'm glad that I did stay. I really am. I think she was right. And I just, you know, went through the grief in my own way here. And you know, for his 1 year anniversary, I went to the Gaelic club with my partner and a mate, and you know, poured some out for him. And yeah, I think what I'm kind of concerned about is, so I'm planning on going for like an extended visit next year, because I haven't had an Irish summer in ages. But kind of going into my granny's house and him not being there, and like going to the graveyard and actually seeing the grave, you know, in person for the first time, I think is going to bring it all back up again. But you know, you can prepare for that. And as Roisin and Orlaith kind of said, like, just let yourself to feel it. And yeah, and just look to the people supporting you, whether it's family or friends. That's what helped me the most.
Absolutely. Oh, thank you. And sorry to hear about the passing of your granddad, Ashleighs. Something that Orla had said previously on one of our Irish 30s, that as Irish, we do grief pretty well in the grand scheme of things. It's something we're very comfortable talking about in terms of death, and we've got our customs, and if you were at home you would have went through all of those, and that can sometimes bring a sense of closure. So you've missed out on that in a way, and it will probably hit you when you do see your granddad's grave and things like that. But Orla, do you have any words of wisdom maybe that you can share for people when they do go home around things like that?
I don't have any words of wisdom, but I guess I'd probably say to you, Ashleighs, you know, you will be in a different place in yourself when you go. You know, it'll be a time that's not now. So you will change, your grief will change. And also when you get there, everybody around, the families and friends, their grief will have changed. It'll look different. So I guess just to, you know, not expect yourself to be in a place that perhaps you felt you should have been last year, that you will go and meet his grave and be there in a different place, if that makes sense. A different place in yourself. And I suppose maybe to communicate with your family before you do go, that around what you might need. And as Katrina said, maybe there is a ritual that you can have as a family based on you being there. Is there something you'd like to do that's important to you? And maybe to plan that before you go. So that might be something that you think about as a family, or something that's important to you and your relationship with your granddad. And can you have some small ritual or ceremony that is important to you, that you feel included in on the soil there? Because I hear you did some beautiful things here for yourself, which is wonderful. But when you're there, what do you need? And I just want to reflect on your auntie and yourself. You sound like you have a beautiful relationship, and what a loving thing she did for you, and how you internalized her voice when your own voice was rocky, or your own thought process was grieving and you weren't sure what you should do. You were able to kind of internalize what she said to you and calm yourself with that. And I think that's a beautiful example of how, when we are here and we can't go, or we don't know what to do with difficult emotions, that it can be sometimes somebody else's words, or a quote, or a poem, or a mantra, or somebody else's voice that we can internalize and practice to bring calm to ourselves, so that we can meet where we are right now in a calmer place. So well done for being able to do that. And you sound very loved by your family.
Thanks very much. That's great advice. I'm definitely going to think about that and plan something for when I go home.
Well done. Good for you.
Thank you, both Roisin and Ashleighs, for sharing, and Orla for supporting them. I think it's really important that when we have these decisions to make, that we know that we're not making it alone. Sometimes even at the Irish Support Agency, someone will call me up with this great or really difficult decision of, for example, having to stay here or go home. And most of the time I don't know them. I might just know their visa situation, what's happening at home, but by the end of the call, I haven't really had to say a lot. Like they've come to that. They've just had to think out loud and say to someone maybe that has no invested interest, because I know in the past when I've had friends trying to make a decision like that, I'm like, no, please don't leave me. I don't want you to go. Where's your stay to Christmas? Yeah, so when it's a stranger, sometimes that can be really helpful as well. Do you have any tools that you could use? I know sometimes people would say like doing a pros and cons list, or is there anything, Orla, that you would suggest, or is it hard? Is that a hard question?
It's a very hard question, thank you. But I think what's really important is to think about maybe some of why you're feeling some of the negative emotions, about why it's difficult. And it's particularly around that emotion we named earlier around guilt. Like, what are you feeling bad about? Are you feeling guilty for living your own life? Are you feeling guilty because you don't feel like a good enough daughter or son because, you're making a decision that maybe is for you, and what that's about? So I think there's more behind it than that. But with regard to making difficult decisions, I think we need to remember that this place is a temporary place. We are stressed, we are in survival mode, we're worried, we're anxious, and we are restricted. So we're coming from a place that isn't clear making those decisions. So I think it's really important to remember that it won't always be like this, and to write some goals down, put them on your phone or write them, or if you're creative, draw them, do something creative with your goals, and remember the life beyond this. And try not to let the anxiety and the worry and the grief restrict you in long-term decisions if possible. Yeah.
Thank you. Look, I think that's really important to know that in the here and now, sometimes it can be difficult to look ahead and remember what our lives were like pre-COVID here, and some of the really amazing things that we were able to do. I'm just going to look, I think we've got a question here in the box. Yeah, is there anything else you would like people to leave with, Orla, before we open up the floor for discussions or any questions?
I think the one thing that I'd like people to remember is to be compassionate to yourselves. None of it, we're all going through this. There's a common humanity here, and you can feel really lonely. But if we remember that we're all going through this and that we have that shared experience, even if we're all managing it differently or have different resources and support strategies, but that we're kind to ourselves, that we don't beat ourselves up, and go gentle, and also to look out for others, to be kind to others, because when we take the focus off ourselves and care for others, we can actually feel better in ourselves too. So it's good for our mental health as well. And just to keep a routine, try and stay connected as possible with people. And really, this is amazing tonight to actually talk about your story, and name the feelings, because when you name them, you calm them down. There's a quote, name it and you tame it. So just name the feelings, acknowledge them, go through them, and know that they're not going to stay as strong as when you're in them. They're going to ease, and you will feel relief from releasing those and sharing your story or having a cry and managing that anxiety as best as possible. But I don't have a quick fix for this. Nobody does. So I think that's really important to acknowledge that there's no right or wrong answer. It's just managing the best you can with your own toolkit.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Orla. I think now is a really good opportunity then, if anyone would like to take themselves off mute and ask a question if you'd like to, or share your story. There's no pressure. Okay, look, if there's no questions now, I think it's really important to just remind everyone that we are there at the Irish Support Agency. If you do need some support, if you need to talk to anyone, if you need to talk about potentially travel exemptions, or just if, as Orla said, like, you know, sharing how you're feeling, if you need counselling support, then Solace is recently launched. So that's a service that we're really delighted to be able to offer with the help of the Light Ball, the Lansdowne Club and Ireland Funds. It's a co-payment service for those that are in a financial position to contribute. We have a directory of Irish practitioners, and that support can be offered over Zoom or in person, depending on where you are in New South Wales. If you go on to our Irish Support Agency website, there is a tab called Solace where you can lodge your inquiry online, and that will come to myself, and I'll be able to give you a call and talk through the service and how best you may use it. So I'd like to really, again, thank everyone tonight for sharing your story, especially Roisin and Ashleighs, and to thank you, Orla, for being there to support us. Okay, I'm just seeing some messages come in here. Yeah, they're thanking the girls for sharing their story. And look, if you need any support, as I said, you can call us at the ISA or find us through social media or our website as well. Okay, good night, everyone. And look, feel free to direct people to this recording when we get it up on our YouTube channel. Una will post about that hopefully in the next day or two. Okay.